Colorism is a political and social hierarchy.
A system of discrimination or a system of oppression, similar to racism, but the difference is that colorism happens intra-communally.
The intercommunal aspect of it, the ways in which we perpetuate colorism towards each other, and particularly how people have created social strata based on color and the darkness of one's skin in almost every country, especially those touched by colonialism.
So it's not just within our communities, it has an effect outside of our communities.
It's a discrimination between, a societal standard of what a person's skin color is and how they are impacted by it within the society that they live in, or just society as a whole.
Seeing the difference in the shades of your skin and then valuing the worth of that person based on their skin color.
They said dark like it was a bad thing.
So colorism is the discriminatory practice of favoring lighter skin over darker skin. And it started here in this country with slavery, where they divided the slaves, and the darker skinned slaves were in the field, the lighter skinned slaves tended to be in the house.
A lot of our habits and our behavior really goes back to slavery and really what we had to experience. Now it played a pivotal role in our history. It really shaped us. We were taken from our homelands, put on boats, brought to a foreign country. We weren't really allowed to express ourselves culturally, emotionally, physically, really in any way whatsoever.
Willie Lynch was a slave owner, and he made this speech on the James River and basically told other slave owners the best way to control slaves through division. And that's the gist of it, was through division. And he talked about dividing slaves based on the shade of their skin. And so this came with slavery, and it perpetuated throughout, from slavery up until even now, that we have this issue of lighter skin over darker skin.
Kind of a phenomenon that we see take place most frequently within communities of color, where people with fairer skin or lighter skin are seen as, more desirable, as smarter, more beautiful, and have all of the positive attributes associated with them because of the color of their skin.
I'll say look at it as a gradient of color, right? The acceptance is lessening as you go. And it's always been just a lack of acceptance for darker skinned people in any one of these issues.
People would say, oh, you're so white on the inside, but you're black on the outside. People would call me an Oreo. People would call me a panda because I wasn't growing up around people who looked like me.
I think it affected me a little bit in my confidence in that way when I was younger. It doesn't affect me as much now because I've accepted my color.
Can I even go here? Will I be accepted here? It kind of created a fear in my mind of interacting with certain people and going for certain things.
My classmates would be like, oh, I want to get out the sun. Oh, you're so dark. They said dark like it was a bad thing.
So as a darker skinned black man, I'm definitely perceived to be more aggressive, more combative. Just in any situation, I have also seen that it's affected the way I interact with just law enforcement. That's also another separate issue, but I always feel, just being darker and just being a black man, I'm going to be perceived as more so combative antagonist who's just really looking to stir up things or cause problems. Those are mostly the tags associated with me just because of my darker skin.
I felt like most of my life it's always been going against the grain to kind of prove others that I'm more than just what I'm represented as or what I look like. Most of the time it's kind of hard to really get past that outward image, and it's not until I open up my mouth or I'm standing in front of people in a certain position or at a certain level for people to kind of understand and wrap their mind around who I am. Something that I think I remember the most of was just me not being exactly how I look. So one of the biggest stereotypes I remember often getting was always being so much nicer than what my presentation looked like. I'm 5'10", dark skin with a bunch of tattoos now, but growing up I've always been a little bit bigger, hence the whole football thing. So you know, the first initial thing that people would kind of label me with would be like this form of like aggression when I'm not even somebody that's aggressive at all. I pretty much think of myself as like a gentle giant or like someone more emotionally in tune with themselves.
You're living in like a body that you don't really, you know, feel comfortable in, that you don't like, that you probably hate, because it's not because that's how you feel, but that's because that's what you've seen and that's what's been imposed on you. So you start to believe that that is correct and that I shouldn't be dark or I shouldn't be black.
I feel like to go from, so I was probably like 4 to, let's say I probably didn't embrace black girl magic till 15, 16. That's what, like 12 years? Like that's really, there's a lot of, not only just puberty, but there's a lot of psychological development to go 12 years without really embracing the beautiness of my skin and really like not feeling like I have a place. That's very destructive. It kind of goes into, you know, we talk about social identity. I think even with that, it becomes such a problem and it triggers depression, which we just see a lot in our Black community. So I just feel like if there was teaching and acceptance of self at such an early age, we probably wouldn't be where we are mentally.
Coming from the Caribbean, we don't immediately feel how serious it is. And that has always been an interesting disconnect, because when you come to a different country, you're the minority, right?
I remember one time my family came down and they saw me and they're like, wow, Bedjena, I thought you were gonna be lighter. My own family. So experiencing colorism was really hard for me because not only were my friends and people at work colors to me, but so was my family.
In Jamaica, people are bleaching their skin because they aspire to be white.
They've had a need to like pander to white people. And when I say that, I mean like for instance, growing up, my sisters would have to like perm their hair and, you know, do things of that nature without, and it'd be like, well, you know, that's not really something that we should be doing.
It's ingrained in the Black community. There's so many different levels of colorism that we still have to fight, whether even like texturism, and that's also something that plays into colorism because it also makes you, it is something that people don't praise. If you have kinkier hair, if you're darker skin, that kind of goes hand in hand with each other. They also tear you down. If you're lighter skin with 3B curls, they'll like you more.
If I'm with my friend who's lighter than me, they'll pay attention to them and disregard me like I'm not in the picture at all. And I feel like that's because my friend who's lighter is closer, you know, to whiteness. And I'm the dark one, so they're gonna disregard me. We're
looking higher up the scale. The lighter your skin is now, the better you are. And that is putting us back because we are not unified if we think that some of us are better than others. At the end of the day, how much can I say and how much can I not say? At the end of the day, we'll both get shot by the police. It made me more aware of how I move to my own people, right? And that doesn't mean I am trying to overcompensate when I'm speaking to someone who is of darker skin or of lighter skin. It just means I'm making sure I'm aware of those biases and of that discrimination that people may be facing, to watch my own words, to make sure I'm not propagating that same idea.
Even my mom, she's lighter skinned than me. So I would look at my mom and be like, dang, what happened? I'd be like, how did I get so dark? And I remember, this is like a core memory in my head. I remember asking my mom, like, hey mom, will my skin ever get lighter when I grow up? And she said, oh, it could. And then I was like, oh, I have a chance.
The thing about colorism too is that it's subjective, right? Like, I could be the darkest person that somebody has met while also acknowledging the fact that I am not the darkest person. Like, I think we get into these conversations about like who's brown skin, who's dark skin, you know, whatever. But really and truly, like, your social setting will then determine your treatment.
Start putting different skin tones into different boxes where it's like, we all shouldn't be put into a box. We're all different.
One day, a friend told me, wow, Bedjena, you're not ghetto. And I'm just thinking, huh? Like, why is she asking me that? You know, because I thought we were cool. Like, I don't know where that came from. Looking back at it, it's because of colorism. Because I'm dark skinned, she obviously assumed that I'm aggressive and ghetto, which isn't the case.
Darker skinned woman is considered more aggressive and more stern, harder to deal with.
There have been ways in which we have told darker skinned people exactly how we feel about them, whether it's the brown paper bag test, or it's the way in which that we have separated slaves from house slaves to field slave. Even in the way that we teach that historically, it's incredibly more nuanced in the ways it happened.
A lot of black men won't date me or approach me because I'm dark skinned, or they think I'm too much. I've been told that. They're like, you're doing too much. They won't acknowledge me because I'm dark skinned. They won't even look my way because they see my dark skin.
The most evident way in which I see colorism presented, and I think the way that a lot of people are able to understand it, is in dating. But I push back on that because I think when we do that, it trivializes colorism from something that is also a political issue to one that is just purely social.
I know growing up, I was really big on the light-skinned girl thing. That's all that was on TV. That's all that was in whatever media that I saw. So I was big on light-skinned girls. That was really what I wanted to date. That was the first person I was attracted to, I would say.
There's a way in which being with someone who is lighter skinned will aid in you having social capital. And social capital, as we know, is used the same way that we use political capital.
It's like my skin, kind of scares them. It's weird, my blackness. So they run away from it.
In dating, that's one huge aspect in which people will maybe settle for someone who is of darker skin, but are aiming towards someone who is lighter skin because of the perceived social hierarchy.
We're trying to move towards people using the term deeply melanated because dark skin tends to have a negative connotation. The word dark within itself has a negative connotation. And for so long we've said dark skin like it's a negative thing. And so we're trying to really get people to move into different language, because language has a lot to do with how we're perceived and how we perceive each other. So we're trying to get people to move into saying deeply melanated and get away from that whole idea of dark skin. It's going to take a long time for that, I know.
With men, when they say men are light skinned, they're more softer, they're not as hard, or they're more feeling themselves and whatnot.
I can tell you, I've joked with my friends, anyway, if I was light skinned, I'd have been a totally different person. I'd have been feeling myself. I'd have been that person that was in the mirror, taking pictures all the time and stuff.
Lighter skinned people, I've definitely seen them be put on a pedestal, and they get more favor, if I'm being honest. They get a lot more favor.
Light skinned men are seen as weaker. They're not as tough as a dark skinned male is. Don't know how true that is. Don't think it is, but it's definitely something that we see as a joke in pop culture, but everything in pop culture, I think, is a 50-50 when it comes to joking or not. The idea comes from somewhere, and someone's propagating this and believes it for real to be putting these things out there.
Just jokes made about lighter skinned people, jokes made about darker skinned people, although we don't necessarily mean them with malice or they don't necessarily come from a bad place, they are very much negative stereotypes, and they also further the stereotypes pushed against us as Black people.
We've come up with this team light skin, team dark skin thing, and how even on social media, how they have filters and things to make your skin look lighter or brighter or whatever term they choose to use. And I see how we have fallen into the trap of letting other people decide for us what beauty is.
If Black people were being represented in something, they were more than likely light skinned. Because that was the best way to represent us. From what I've seen, it's the best way to represent us and, allow us to be seen as accepted. Or hey, that person's not fully Black, but they got a little drop in there that made them look like that with the curly hair and stuff. And that, promoted, this Black person is accepted, but we're not going to accept the dark-skinned Black person.
The mammy is typically a darker-skinned, larger woman who is associated as a caretaker, as a lover, as the type of person you run to or cry to when you need something, but is given nothing in return. So usually those would be, and that trope itself comes from Black women who used to take care of and nurse these white women's kids.
I always have to be that negative image. Why can't I be the love interest? Why can't I be, some of these things that other women are allowed to be? And I think that when it comes to beauty, we have allowed the outside world to dictate to us what is beautiful.
Whenever I was looking on TV, I never really saw any representation. It was always they're like the sidekick. They're the people that come in for maybe an episode for comedic relief, or if there is, like, they have their own stories, always something that's very traumatic. They never really get a good storyline. So I never really saw a good representation.
This idea that like dark-skinned women or bigger women are supposed to be reliable, independent, mule-esque, with no personalities though. Nothing to say, nothing to give or offer the world, only to be taken from, right? And taken from without permission. And I think that's also where rape culture comes into play, and where we see a lot of dark-skinned Black women being harmed because of these types of tropes.
I feel like we are good enough for the struggle, but once you make it over that hunch, like, you're going to get a light-skinned wife. Like, look at Steve Harvey. His first wife wasn't Marjorie Harvey's skin color. So I just think it kind of makes us Black women feel like, dang. So it's like things just, even though passing was so long ago, I still think it affects multiple generations. We're easier to change our social groups. And I think when we talk about generational trauma, how do we recover from things like that? And so it goes from passing with skin color to now passing by association.
Media, and when we interact with media, creating these archetypes like the mammy, like the vixen, to categorize Black women in very specific and nuanced ways to create an environment in which we have only one box to fit in, right? So the other one, the vixen that I mentioned, we see a lot more in hip hop and popular culture. Sexy, scandalous, hot tamale, that whole vibe. So when we see Black women actually appearing in media, what tropes are they being forced to interact with? And who does that benefit? The vixen is someone who is sexy and appealing to the male gaze. So they fit a very particular archetype, which is why colorism then feeds into featureism. You'll see very skinny, fit, maybe they are large in the back but not in the front. They fit a very particular mold. All of those women look very similarly.
Exotic, that's something that they were looking at least in the 2000s, but it makes you look like, oh, you're mixed with something different. You're not just Black. You're a little bit more ambiguous, like you can't really pin it down. That makes it more interesting.
So many of these images about what beauty is, it's the Beyoncés, it's the Halle Berrys, and not Alicia Keys, it's not to take away from them. They are beautiful women, but so is Viola Davis, so is Lupita Nyong'o, so is Angela Bassett. These are also women who are beautiful, but they're not being held up as what the standard of beauty is for us. So we have to begin to say, we're not going to allow Hollywood and the media to dictate to us what beauty is for us.
It affects us tremendously, one, because it's not hardly talked about, it's not hardly named, because we do, and rightfully so, spend a lot of time talking about racism, which again is kind of intercommunal in terms of, I hate to just say Black and white because it's not a Black and white issue, but thinking about how Black people and other communities of color are situated within a white supremacist framework, whereas colorism asks us to kind of look at ourselves and to look internally.
It's definitely a big effect on the Black community to me because we're perpetuating it now. It's not just, it probably just used to be white people perpetuating it. But like now we as Black people, we perpetuate it. We put certain people on a pedestal because of their color. Or we enjoy this person more because of their color. We allow this person more leeway because of their color that you wouldn't allow if they were a little bit darker skinned, which isn't fair to anybody.
It's something that we can see in pop culture in general, where although yes, we as Black people celebrate our culture, and nowadays ghetto isn't necessarily immediately a bad term, it's still evident that that's the first thought that seems to come into other people's heads.
This isn't just social, this is people's lives. Why are half or more of the people who are murdered by police categorically dark-skinned people? Why are so many dark-skinned and fat black men being killed? Those things are not inseparable. When we talk about colorism, when we talk about racism, like we're also talking about homophobia, fatphobia. We're talking about sexism. Like we're talking about the ways in which all of these things intersect to give someone an experience in this world. So
unless you get an explicit kind of comment where people are calling an attribute of yours out, you don't really know where a particular kind of strain of discrimination is coming from. So then it's like, oh, well, yeah, I am a dark-skinned woman, you know, I do come from a lower socioeconomic background, or I do have, you know, a disability, or whatever attribute or part of a person's identity that's salient. Because of the way that, you know, we live our lives, we don't always know where that discrimination is coming from.
So I think the way Kimberly Crenshaw explained it is the perfect way of saying it. It's like you're coming to an intersection, but there's not 4 different ways that are going on. It's like 1,000 different ways, and they all intersect to create your unique experience. And that's why personal experiences of colorism or racism or any type of ism or phobia are subjective in some ways. They're never going to be universal.
You're a woman, you're a black woman. You are a deeply melanated black woman. So you're not only dealing with sexism, you're dealing with racism, you're dealing with colorism. And the intersectionality of all of that means that you kind of many times feel like, okay, when I walk in a room, and if I walk in a room that is, we'll just say 75% white, I don't know which of those isms I'm going to have to counteract.
I'm Jamaican, so like, I remember growing up, I'm in a household where it's like you have your parents telling you, you're not black, you're Jamaican. And it's like, how can that be said to someone who is black? I literally look like any other black person, but just hearing that notion growing up and then having these experiences that I've had made me realize how much within our community there is that disconnect.
Intersectionality also plays a pivotal role in this, just because being Ghanaian myself, I can imagine how like my experiences have shaped me. I can imagine how an African American, Caribbean, Haitian, really anyone at all can have just so many different experiences just because of the norms upheld in their city and their home compared to that of like a neighboring place or just an entirely different place. So it's very much different, and it very much defines you and also like kind of shapes your experience throughout your life.
As a fat, brown-skinned woman, I am treated a certain way, and those things also can't be deviated from each other. I can't just say it's because of one particular thing, but I know that all of those things work for the greater good of white supremacy.
I'd like to highlight specifically women, because I could talk to a guy about it and he's like, yeah, I joke about light skins, for example, but that doesn't end our life. Like for us who joke about the light skinned guy getting girls easier, we won't say a light-skinned guy is going to get a job over us. But for women, I always noticed it was a significantly deeper conversation. Like, men don't look at me, men disrespect me, people disrespect me. My boss has certain phrases that he'll say to me he won't say to my coworkers. And those things rang true more often than not. And so that disproportionate effect of colorism on men versus women was probably the first thing that shone out to me when I approached it.
We can't just assume that, you know, all black people or all dark-skinned black people have the same experience, because, you know, just using the 2 intersections of, you know, race and color with socioeconomic background status, you might have a dark-skinned black person who is come from affluent means and have had all of the niceties of life.
There may be universal aspects, but one person's experience is going to be colored by their socioeconomic status. How much were you able to access? What type of education were you able to get because of your socioeconomic status? And then because you're Black, what type of education are you able to get because of your socioeconomic status, which is colored by the fact that you are Black?
And I feel like this is really what colorism stems from. It's really ignorance. If you take the time to educate yourself and really inform yourself of the people who are around you and the people who look like you, you will not believe these negative stereotypes or have these assumptions about people.
Don't be afraid to talk. A lot of times when we battle some of the issues that we have as Black people, we like to shut down because naturally the generational trauma that we face, we like to harbor it. We push it under and we keep going as if like nothing ever happened. But I think that's what also constitutes those issues. I think that's what creates more problems for us because it doesn't give us an opportunity to really talk about the things that impact us or hold us back from being our best version of ourselves. So to those youth of color coming on and moving forward, don't be afraid to speak out about how you feel. When you are being discriminated against because you may be darker in skin tone, say something.
I grew up thinking every POC person knew about colorism, which isn't the case. A lot of people actually don't really know what colorism is or like why they feel certain ways. So talking about it will make people like more aware of why they act a certain way and make them more cautious of the things they do. So
it's really our duty as human beings to educate ourselves and just really improve ourselves so we can provide a better shared experience for everyone around us. And I feel like as Black people, that's really what we need to do. I feel like we've really gotten comfortable in the sense where we're like stagnant. We're not necessarily pushing for these things the way that we should. Because again, we wouldn't want this to carry on to generations, because again, it's not going to be a good experience for anyone then. So I really think it really all boils down to like education and information just to like dispel the misinformation that exists within the Black community.
Colorism is not just like who you like and who you don't like, who's your friend and who you're not friends with. Colorism is also who is being incarcerated, who does not have the ability to meet their needs. And so I think if we start attacking things structurally through grassroots movements and more community-based programming, we'll see a large shift in how people understand each other and how people interact with each other.
Mental, emotional, anxiety, depression, all that stuff that comes with colorism, if you don't want your children to grow up with that, then you've got to start addressing it within the family dynamic and stop the name calling. I tell people we got to stop the name calling, even if you have to polite, and I very much agree with being respectful, but even if you have to tell grandmom, respectfully, grandmom, we don't talk like that anymore. We don't call kids monkey and blackie and red bone and, light bright darn near white. No, we don't do that anymore. So we've got to begin to take control of it within the family dynamic so that within our communities, it begins to change and we begin to change it on a global scale.
There's so many examples around us of darker skinned people who have excelled, darker skinned people who are glorious, lighter skinned people who have done amazing things. Telling yourself that you're the exception and that you're nothing and that you're not up to par, it's only self-sabotage. There's people everywhere around the world who represent that that's not true. That the color of your skin cannot and will not define what you can achieve.
It's generational. We have to know that it's wrong, first of all, because as much as we can try to tell our parents, hey, this isn't right, they're already grown, they're already stuck in their ways. We can't really change. I'm not gonna fight a grown man and try to change his beliefs.
Stop listening to what people have to say because it doesn't matter. Like those people, they're hurting. They're hurting deeply, so don't let those words hurt you.
One of the things Martin Luther King said, that he dreamed a day where his children would be judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And we need to be letting our children know that character is very important and that you are beautiful. Children need to be told that. It needs to be reinforced.
Kids are so malleable and they're a sponge and they soak everything up. So when we're raising our kids, when we're raising the next generation, that's the only way that we can really make the change, because they're the ones that are going to carry on all of our ideals from before. So you have to start from the bottom up. I can't start from the top and try to change my parents, my grandparents' ideas. They've already made their decisions. But if I start from the bottom and try to grow from there, then that's the only way that we can really facilitate change for everybody.
We're talking about a structural machine that is ingrained in every single part of our lives. It's not as simple as like flipping a switch. It's really not. It'll take social and political change. And so that means getting politically active, being active in your community.
Not speaking for, of course, but definitely speaking with folk who are directly experiencing or have experienced colorism, and to never let a comment or an action or gesture that is colorist, to never let it slide without comment, without using it as a teachable moment.
Colorism isn't just about you and how you feel at the moment and how you've been treated. Colorism is about the structural and political ways in which people are subjugated to mistreatment and, in the case of Black people, death. And we're trying to save lives. And so if we understand how colorism impacts people's lives, literally, I think people will take it a lot more serious and do a lot more personal introspection and community introspection to see some real change.
My skin is something that doesn't illustrate who I am, but something that does define what I am to become.
Different, but still beautiful.
My skin tells a story.
It's marvelous.
My skin is beautiful.
Beautiful.
Tasteful.
It's empowering.
Incredible.
My skin is more than a monolith.
My skin is impactful.
My skin is powerful.
My skin is leadership.
My skin is hated, but it's beautiful.
My skin is resilient. My skin is beautiful. My skin glows. My skin is unique. My skin is lovely, bro. I don't know. My skin, I just love it. I love my skin, bro. I love it. I've never actually talked about that before. You're asking questions I've never thought about. So I'm really happy to say that. I love my skin.